The soup spoon was still on its way to my mouth when my father let out his first laugh. It wasn't a light laugh. It was the kind that fills the room and makes people stare. My mother joined in, looking at me with that, "You've got to be kidding," smile. All because I'd told her, quite honestly, that I couldn't afford the family trip that summer. They thought it was funny, as if it were just another one of my excuses. But to me, it wasn't funny at all. Share this story to reach more people, subscribe to the channel, share this video on WhatsApp, and leave a comment about where you're listening from. I'll be thrilled to read every comment. I held the spoon, trying to remain calm. Inside, that laughter burned. It wasn't the first time my difficulties had been treated as something minor, as if they were a whim or laziness. The sound echoed inside my head as I pretended to smile and returned my eyes to my plate. My palms were sweaty, not from embarrassment, but from something else, a spark of resolve. Maybe I couldn't afford the trip they dreamed of, but I could give them something they'd never forget. A plan was beginning to form, still nebulous, but with a sweet taste of silent revenge. I didn't want to humiliate anyone, but I needed to show that my worth wasn't measured by numbers or expensive hotel reservations. So that night, between spoonfuls, I decided my answer would come in an unexpected way. When I went to sleep, the laughter still echoed in my mind. I tossed and turned in bed, staring at the dark ceiling, feeling every word spoken at the table weigh more heavily than it should. But along with this weight grew a stubborn will to act, not to prove anything to anyone, but to prove myself. I got up, went to the kitchen, and opened my laptop. I didn't look for travel packages or resort deals. I typed something completely different, something that had been on my mind for years, but that I'd never had the courage to do. The click of the keys was like the sound of hammering a new path. The plan was risky, completely out of the ordinary. I knew it wouldn't be easy, but I also knew that if it worked, it would be something that would make their laughter turn to silence, and maybe even tears. The thought of seeing that change gave me a strange adrenaline rush. I spent hours researching, fine-tuning details, and confirming dates and times. It was as if the world around me had disappeared. With each new tab I opened, my heart beat faster. I was creating something unique, something neither of us would forget. When I finally closed my laptop, it was already past 3 a.m. I was exhausted, but with a smile on my face. What I had in store wasn't a trip, it was an experience, and no one was prepared for what was to come. For the next few days, I went about my daily routine as if nothing had happened. My parents continued talking about the trip I couldn't afford, and every now and then, they'd chuckle softly, as if they didn't want to offend, but still did. I pretended not to care, but inside, each comment fueled my determination. Meanwhile, I moved in silence. Messages were exchanged on my cell phone, quick calls at work, papers were printed and carefully stored. Share this story to reach more people. Subscribe to the channel, share this video on WhatsApp, and leave a comment about where you're listening from. I'll be thrilled to read each one. There was a certain pleasure in keeping everything hidden. It was as if I were living a parallel life, with a secret that grew bigger every day. The little lies, "I'm going out to take care of work," or "I need to stop by the grocery store," hid events much bigger than they could imagine. At times, I considered telling him, just to see the immediate reaction. But no, revealing it too soon would have wasted the power of the impact. I wanted the moment to arrive unexpectedly, almost shockingly, so that it would be impossible to ignore. Every step of the plan required meticulous attention to detail. One mistake could ruin everything. But as I finalized the final confirmations, I felt I was building something worth more than any luxury resort or famous beach. With the day a week away, the atmosphere at home was the same as ever. My dad talked about the summer heat, and my mom commented on how it would be amazing if we could all go on the trip. I just smiled and changed the subject. The secret burned in my throat, but I had to resist. I spent my nights fine-tuning the final details, schedules, transportation, what to bring, what to leave. Everything had to be precise. Any slip-up could ruin everything, and I had no plan B. It was this or nothing. That Friday, I received the final confirmation email. My phone screen glowed in the darkness of my room, and my heart leaped. It was official. There was no turning back. I had paid, booked, and organized everything myself, and no one knew a thing. The curious thing is that, even with all the excitement, I began to feel a different kind of anxiety. It wasn't fear that the plan would fail. It was fear that the impact would be greater than I expected. I was about to stir their emotions in a way I never had before. That night, lying in bed, I realized that maybe this wasn't just a response to their laughter. Maybe it was something much bigger, a chance to change how they saw me forever. The morning of the big day arrived shrouded in eerie silence. The sun was already illuminating the kitchen when I descended the stairs, and the smell of freshly brewed coffee mingled with the sweet aroma of pancakes. My parents sat at the table, chatting about trivial things, unaware that their routine was about to change radically. I felt my heart race with every step I took, as if every second pushed me closer to the moment of revelation. I placed my cup on the table and sat, observing them with almost clinical care. They smiled, laughed at inside jokes, and I wondered if they still remembered the night they laughed at me. Maybe not. Maybe to them it was just a trivial comment. But to me, that moment was etched like an open wound. Today, that wound would have an answer. My fingers drummed on the rim of my cup, a nervous gesture I tried to hide. The envelope was in my pocket, heavy not because of the paper, but because of the meaning it carried. I felt the heat of the moment approaching, like a movie reaching its most anticipated scene. With each sip of coffee, I took a deep breath to maintain my composure. For a moment, I considered putting it off until another day. Maybe it would be better to wait. Maybe they weren't ready. But that hesitation didn't last long. I'd spent sleepless nights planning, saving, and fine-tuning every detail to make this day perfect. Postponing wasn't an option. I stood up without saying anything, letting the silence fill the space. I walked to the hallway, took a deep breath, and returned with the envelope in my hands. I placed it on the table between the three of us. My parents looked at me curiously, uncomprehending. "What's this?" my mother asked. I simply said, "Our trip." Their eyes met for a brief moment, a mixture of surprise and suspicion. My father frowned as if trying to figure out if this was a joke. My mother reached out and pulled the envelope out slowly, almost afraid to open it. I could hear the delicate sound of the paper tearing, each fiber giving way, as if marking the passage to something new. Inside, there were no plane tickets to a sunny beach or a luxurious resort. There was something different, unusual, that immediately stopped my mother from speaking. She looked at me with an unreadable expression, as if processing what she was seeing. My father took the papers from her hands and began to leaf through them, unable to hide the frown on his face. The silence that followed was absolute, broken only by the distant sound of a car passing by on the street. It was as if the world had stopped to watch that moment. I said nothing, letting the weight of surprise fall upon them naturally. It was important that the reaction come unabated, without any explanation from me. My mother blinked a few times, looked at me, and asked, "Are you serious?" I held her gaze, just nodding. She took a deep breath, as if needing air to take it all in. My father, on the other hand, seemed lost, trying to reconcile what he saw with what he imagined. I knew this was just the beginning. What they held in their hands was only a fraction of what was to come. The true meaning was still hidden, and once it was revealed, there would be no turning back. My father held the paper as if it were too fragile to touch. His eyes scanned each line, trying to absorb the information that didn't make sense at first glance. There were dates, times, and an address they didn't recognize. No famous city names, no luxury hotels, just coordinates and a simple description. Exclusive experience, preserved for you. My mother read aloud from the document, her voice trembling slightly. Is this some kind of guided tour?" she asked, looking at me as if seeking confirmation, but at the same time afraid of the answer. I just smiled, not saying a word. Silence was my weapon, and every second increased their curiosity. My father leaned back in his chair, his eyes still fixed on the paper. "This isn't what I was expecting," he said, his tone a mix of surprise and confusion. I could feel the tension building between them, like a rope about to snap. Each new question that arose was exactly what I wanted to provoke. Curiosity began to give way to a slight unease. It wasn't anger, but the uneasiness of realizing something big is being hidden. My parents were used to controlling the script, and for the first time in a long time, they had no idea what was coming. It was then that my mother placed the paper on the table and asked, with a serious look in her eyes, "And what exactly do you have in store for us?" I simply stood up, took the envelope back and said, "You'll find out tomorrow, and I promise, it will be much more than just a trip." The rest of the day passed like a slow-motion movie. My parents continued their activities, but I noticed that every now and then their eyes would meet as if they were trying to decipher a riddle. The envelope was no longer on the table, but its presence loomed over the house like a heavy cloud about to rain. I, on the other hand, was in a state of absolute concentration. I double-checked every detail: the reservations, the transportation, the exact times. I made discreet calls to confirm that everything was ready. Each confirmation brought me a mixture of relief and anxiety. I knew there was no room for error. Not now. That evening, dinner was quieter than usual. There were no jokes, no reminiscing about past trips. The atmosphere was charged, as if we were all breathing the same air, heavy with anticipation. I remained calm, even though a storm was brewing inside. Before falling asleep, I sat for a while on the edge of my bed, staring at the envelope that now rested on my nightstand. The dim light from the lamp illuminated its edges, and I knew that inside it was not just a piece of paper, but the key to a shift in perspective. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath. The next day would bring the truth to light, and once revealed, there would be no more room for scornful laughter. All that would remain would be the impact of something they could never have imagined. The alarm clock rang before the sun had even risen. The house was still silent when I knocked lightly on my parents' bedroom door. They opened it sleepily, and their first look was one of surprise. I was standing, ready, and holding the envelope. "Time to go," I announced with a tight smile. My parents, still confused, exchanged glances. There wasn't time for many questions. I gave them quick instructions: wear comfortable clothes, bring only a light jacket and a pair of sturdy shoes. Their reaction was muted, but filled with curiosity and a hint of suspicion. The car was already packed. The bags I'd discreetly packed were in the trunk. When we got in, the cool morning air mingled with the strange energy that filled the vehicle. My parents tried to make conversation, but I limited myself to short answers. I didn't want to give anything away too soon. The road was nearly deserted. The golden light of dawn painted the trees and fields beyond the window. My parents watched, trying to find clues to their destination. But the road signs were no help. There were no town names or famous landmarks along the way. After nearly an hour of driving, they began to realize we were getting farther from any place they knew. Their uneasiness grew. My father leaned forward and asked, "Where exactly are we going?" I glanced in the rearview mirror and simply replied, "Closer than you think." The road narrowed to a dirt path lined with tall trees. Sunlight barely penetrated the canopy, creating a shadowy corridor that seemed to swallow us whole. My parents shifted on their seats, visibly confused. Then, suddenly, the gate appeared. It was imposing, made of wrought iron, with intricate details that seemed to tell ancient stories. In the center was a coat of arms none of us recognized. The gate was closed, but a small guardhouse to the side revealed the presence of someone waiting for us. I parked and got out of the car. A tall man in an impeccable uniform came out of the guardhouse and greeted me by name. My parents looked at each other in surprise. He slowly opened the gate, and the sound of metal echoed through the tree-lined corridor, heightening the feeling that we were about to enter another world. As soon as we passed through the gate, the landscape changed. The path opened onto a vast field, with buildings in the distance that didn't look like hotels or ordinary homes. There was something almost cinematic about the way everything slowly revealed itself, as if it were a carefully prepared set for that moment. My parents fell silent. There were no more immediate questions, just attentive gazes, trying to absorb every detail. I knew we were close to the point where it would no longer be possible to hide what I had planned, but I still wanted a few more minutes for my curiosity to reach its peak. As we progressed through the property, the feeling of isolation grew. The countryside stretched as far as the eye could see, dotted with ancient trees that seemed to hold centuries-old secrets. The wind blew gently, but carried a distant sound, almost like a chant coming from somewhere hidden. My parents looked around, taking in every detail, but unable to pinpoint exactly where we were. The car drove up to an imposing building made of light stone, with tall windows and a staircase leading to a solid wooden double door. When we parked, a group of people were already there, as if expecting us. They wore elegant yet antique clothes, as if from another era. One of them approached and greeted my parents by name, something that left them visibly disconcerted. "Welcome," the man said, his smile calm but full of mystery. Without much explanation, he led us inside. The interior was even more impressive. Wide corridors, soft lighting, and every wall filled with photographs and objects that seemed to belong to different generations of the same family. My parents looked at each other as if trying to find some clue in my expression, but I remained silent. The sound of our footsteps echoed on the marble floor, and at every turn, there was something new to admire. Sculptures, stained glass windows, and portraits whose eyes seemed to follow us. Deep down, I felt a quiet satisfaction. They were completely immersed, unsure if this was a visit, an event, or something even more special. And that was exactly what I wanted, to maintain the fine line between mystery and revelation. We arrived in a large room, illuminated by a massive crystal chandelier hanging from the high ceiling. The walls were lined with bookshelves filled with antique books, and in the center stood a large round table, already set with impeccably arranged bowls, plates, and cutlery. The aroma of exquisite food already wafted through the air, arousing curiosity and appetite. An older man with an imposing posture and affable gaze rose from one of the chairs and walked toward us. He greeted my parents as if they were old acquaintances, calling them by their first names and speaking with the naturalness of someone who had exchanged many conversations with them. My parents looked at each other, trying to remember where they knew that face from, and found no answer. He invited us to sit, and as discreet waiters served drinks, conversation began to flow. But everything said seemed carefully chosen to maintain the enigmatic atmosphere. Small allusions to family stories and preserved traditions were made, but without truly revealing the purpose of our presence. My parents, previously restless, were now completely engrossed. Their gazes roamed every detail of the room, every gesture of the people at the table, as if trying to decipher a secret code. I, sitting next to them, watched silently, feeling the tension growing with each passing minute. At that moment, I realized we were about to cross a line. Soon they would know exactly what I had in store, and the impact would be far greater than any of us imagined. The soft sound of a bell echoed through the room, and all eyes turned to the double doors in the corner. They opened slowly, revealing a hallway lit by torches on the walls. A man entered carrying a large carved wooden box, which he carefully placed in the center of the table. Silence fell over the room. My parents looked at the box with the same mixture of curiosity and trepidation I felt when I first saw it. The host's hands glided over the intricate carving, as if caressing an heirloom. "This piece," he said, "has belonged to our family for generations, and today, it belongs to you." The impact of those words was immediate. My parents froze. The man slowly opened the box, revealing a collection of old objects, photographs, handwritten letters, and a thick, leather-bound book scarred by age. My mother covered her mouth in surprise, while my father leaned in for a better look. Among the photos were images of places and people they recognized. It was at that moment that my father whispered, This is our family." He began to leaf through the book, and each page revealed records and stories they had never seen before. It was as if a lost piece of their identity had been found. My eyes met theirs. There was no more disbelieving laughter, no more irony. There was pure emotion, and a million questions ready to explode. The host approached and explained that months earlier, I had contacted this private institution, which specializes in reconstructing family histories from rare and inaccessible archives. Everything in that room, the photos, the objects, the book, had been tracked down, preserved, and restored especially for my parents. My mother wept silently, running her fingers over an old photograph of her own father, taken when he was my brother's age. My father, his voice breaking, read aloud excerpts from letters his grandfather had written during his youth. It was like watching a movie where every scene was part of who they were, but something they had never seen before. The people around us, the strangers who welcomed us, were, in fact, experts and historians who had participated in the research, delving into forgotten archives, cross-referencing records, and finding connections that had previously been lost to time. While my parents took it all in, I remained silent, observing. That moment needed no long explanation. Every expression on their faces, every tear, every suppressed smile, was proof that all the effort had been worth it. I knew this was the most important journey we would ever take, not to a geographic location, but to the past that shaped who we are. And in that moment, I realized I had accomplished so much more than I'd hoped, not just proving my worth, but delivering something eternal. We stayed in that room for hours, and the more time passed, the more I realized the transformation taking place before me. At first, my parents handled the objects carefully, as if afraid of damaging them. But soon, their hesitation gave way to complete immersion. My mother laughed through tears as she recognized the dress her grandmother wore in a formal portrait. My father sat in prolonged silence before an old map with handwritten notes, as if mentally retracing the paths of those who came before him. The walls of the room seemed to envelop us, isolating us from the rest of the world. The soft glow of the chandelier reflected in their eyes, and I could see our entire lives passing before us. Not just their lives, but the lives of everyone who came before them. Every photo, every letter, every detail seemed to fill in invisible gaps in our history. It was as if, suddenly, there was a continuous thread connecting the present to a past we had never touched. I didn't say much. I didn't need to. All the weight of sleepless nights, hours of research, phone calls, doubts, and even my own insecurities was there, condensed in that moment. I remembered the night at dinner, when my voice was drowned out by their laughter. That sound had wounded me deeply. But looking back at what I had managed to provide, I realized that that wound had transformed into something immensely greater, a gift that could never be purchased at a travel agency. My parents, who had previously laughed at my inability to afford a conventional trip, now held in their hands something that no amount of money could truly measure. It was a piece of us, where we came from, who we were, and in a way, who we still are. They didn't need to say much for me to understand. The look they gave me, filled with gratitude and respect, was confirmation that everything had changed between us. As the sun began to set, we left the property with the boxes carefully packed in the car. The road back felt different. There was no hurried conversation, no need to fill the silence, just the feeling that something had been restored, not just in the papers or the images, but in what we meant to each other. I knew that after that day there would be no more room for scornful laughter, only for stories we would keep telling. As I drove, I saw their reflections in the rearview mirror, looking at the material, exchanging small remarks, smiling softly. And in that moment, I understood that this had been the most important journey of all, one that didn't take us far off the map, but that brought us closer to who we truly are. If this story touched you, share it, so more people understand that the value of a trip isn't in the distance covered, but in how it makes us feel. Subscribe to the channel, send this video on WhatsApp, and comment where you're watching from. I read every comment and would love to hear how far this story has reached.